My beloved child, something quietly beautiful has shifted, and the strangest part is that you may not even realize what you did. Somewhere in the emotional distance between you and the person your heart keeps returning to, a realization has finally landed with such unexpected force that they could no longer hold their feelings behind a calm expression. These are not tears born from sadness. They are the kind that arrive when someone has carried one question for far too long, and suddenly receives an answer without anyone needing to say a word. Stay with this, because the answer is not the obvious one. They are not overwhelmed because you chased them, persuaded them, proved yourself, or performed some dramatic gesture. What touched them happened much more quietly. You finally did something they had secretly hoped you would do, even though they may never have known how to ask for it. You stopped forcing what needed space to become real. And somehow, that simple shift reached them more deeply than any long explanation could have. There was a moment recently when your soulmate found themselves thinking about you differently. At first, nothing around them looked extraordinary. The room was familiar. Their phone was nearby. Life was continuing with its ordinary sounds and responsibilities. Yet one thought kept returning: why does this feel different now? They tried to move past it, but the feeling followed them. Something about your energy no longer seemed to be reaching toward them with the same restless question. Something had softened. Something had become peaceful. And unexpectedly, that peace made them feel your presence more strongly, not less. Don't skip, because this is where the meaning begins to turn. They had become accustomed to believing that love would always arrive with urgency, explanations, signs, and constant reassurance. Perhaps they even expected you to keep knocking emotionally on a door they were still afraid to open. But then you changed. Maybe you chose your dignity in a situation where the older version of you would have over-explained. Maybe you stopped measuring your worth by somebody else's response. Maybe you returned your attention to your own life. Maybe you finally allowed silence to exist without treating it like rejection. Whatever form it took, something inside you quietly said, "I can love deeply without abandoning myself." And that is what reached them. Your soulmate did not immediately understand why it affected them so intensely. At first they simply noticed your absence from an emotional pattern they had grown familiar with. They expected the old cycle to repeat. They expected another signal, another attempt, another moment that would reassure them you were still standing exactly where they had left you emotionally. But instead, they sensed movement. Not movement away from love, movement toward yourself. And suddenly they were confronted with something they had avoided for longer than they wanted to admit: you were never asking them to rescue you. You were offering them a place beside you. There is an enormous difference between those two things, and they are only now beginning to understand it. Something important is waiting for you in this realization. Their happiness is connected to relief. Deep relief. Because somewhere beneath all the uncertainty, they were afraid that the connection had become too tangled to ever feel simple again. They wondered whether too much had gone unsaid. They wondered whether hesitation had created a distance neither of you would know how to cross. Yet when they noticed this new steadiness in you, something opened inside them. It told them that maybe the story was not asking to be repaired through pressure. Maybe it was asking both of you to grow enough to meet differently. That thought stayed with them. Minutes passed. Then longer. They return to old memories, not the dramatic ones, but the quiet ones. A look you gave them when you thought nobody noticed. A conversation where you listened instead of trying to win. A small kindness that seemed ordinary at the time. The way you made room for their complicated emotions without immediately turning everything toward yourself. And suddenly those memories look different. They realized that your strongest expressions of love had never been the loudest ones. Your love had been hiding in consistency. In patience. In the moments when you could have demanded certainty but chose understanding. Then came the memory that broke through their composure completely. It was something tiny. So tiny that you might not even remember doing it. There was a moment when they pulled back emotionally, and instead of punishing them for it, you gave them room while quietly keeping your heart open. At the time, they mistook that kindness for something ordinary. Now they see what it cost you. Now they understand the emotional maturity hidden inside that choice. Their eyes filled because they realized something almost painfully beautiful. You were capable of loving them without trying to own the outcome. And now, after everything, you have extended that same grace toward yourself. That is this they never expected. You finally chose not to lose yourself while loving them. Think about why that would make someone emotional. When a person truly cares for you, one of their deepest fears can be the possibility that loving them is somehow costing you your peace. Your soulmate may have carried that concern quietly. They may have wondered whether their confusion, timing, or hesitation had placed too much weight on your heart. They may even have kept distance partly because they did not want to keep hurting someone they genuinely valued. But seeing you stronger, seeing you calmer, sensing that your life is not frozen while waiting for them, has changed the meaning of your connection in their mind. Now love does not look like a responsibility they are terrified of mishandling. It looks like an invitation they may finally be ready to approach with honesty. Stay till the end, because there is another layer here, and it is the one they did not expect themselves to feel. Alongside the relief came admiration. Your soulmate began seeing you not only as someone they feel deeply connected to, but as someone who has quietly transformed. They remembered versions of you that doubted themselves. Moments when you questioned whether you were enough. Times when silence from another person could change the way you saw your own value. And then they compared that memory with what they sense from you now. Something is different. You no longer seem to be asking the world for permission to believe you matter. You are beginning to live as though your heart is worthy of protection too. That recognition moved through them slowly. First came a smile they could not explain. Then the smile disappeared into a long silence. And then, without expecting it, their eyes filled. They lowered their head. They tried to compose themselves. But another thought arrived. They finally see what I always hoped they would see. Not simply that they are lovable. Something deeper. That they do not have to exhaust themselves to receive love. They do not need to become smaller, louder, more convenient, more patient than humanly possible, or endlessly understanding just to earn a place in someone's heart. They can simply be who they are, growing imperfectly, carrying both tenderness and boundaries. And your soulmate is happy because this change means that if your paths move closer again, they will not be meeting the version of you who was terrified of losing them. They will be meeting the version of you who knows that real connection must choose you too. Something almost ironic is happening now. The moment you stop trying to control where this story was going may be the exact moment they started imagining where it could go. The moment you stopped rehearsing what you would say if they returned may be the moment they began rehearsing what they would finally say to you. The moment you chose peace instead of constant interpretation may be the moment they became brave enough to examine their own feelings without running from them. This does not mean every unanswered question disappears overnight. It does not mean two people suddenly become perfect. That would not be real. What it means is that something healthier has entered the space between you. Your soulmate feels it, and it has given them permission to hope in a way they had previously resisted. Then another realization surfaced, and this one shook them even more. They understood that you never truly needed them to complete you. You wanted them. There is tenderness in being wanted by someone who is capable of standing on their own. There is freedom in knowing a person is choosing you rather than clinging to you. And once your soulmate felt that distinction, a great deal of their internal resistance began to make sense. They had been protecting themselves from a kind of love you were no longer offering. You had changed. The connection had changed. Yet their assumptions had not caught up. Until now. Imagine the stillness of that moment. Their phone is in their hand, but they are not using it. Your name may have crossed their mind more times than they would admit. There are words forming that they have not yet decided how to say. They are thinking about conversations that never happened because they were not emotionally ready for them. They are wondering whether you know how much your growth has affected them. And beneath all of those thoughts is one simple emotion: happiness. Not the loud kind. The overwhelming, almost disorienting happiness that comes when you realize somebody you care about has finally found their way back to themselves. That is why the tears came. They were not crying because you became someone else. They were crying because they recognized you again beneath all the uncertainty. The person who could love intensely and still laugh freely. The person who had dreams that existed outside this connection. The person who once trusted themselves more naturally. Somewhere along the journey, doubt may have temporarily covered that version of you. Now they can feel that person returning, only wiser. Softer in some places. Stronger in others. And perhaps your soulmate is beginning to understand that they have some returning to do as well. Here is where the story becomes more personal than it first appears. Their tears were not only about you. Your growth became a mirror. It quietly asked them a question they can no longer avoid: if they have become brave enough to stop hiding from themselves, what am I still hiding from? That question changed the room. They began thinking about the truths they had postponed. The feelings they disguised beneath practicality. The conversations they delayed because timing never seemed perfect. They thought about how easy it had been to tell themselves that someday they would become clearer, someday they would know exactly what to do, someday courage would arrive without discomfort. But watching you change has shown them that courage rarely arrives first. Sometimes you move while your hands are still uncertain, and courage catches up later. They can see now that this may be what you did. You did not wait until you felt no attachment. You simply stopped letting attachment decide your worth. You did not stop caring. You stopped using uncertainty as evidence against yourself. You did not close your heart. You gave your heart a home inside you again. And your soulmate finds that profoundly moving because it removes the invisible pressure from what comes next. If they move toward you, it can come from truth. If a conversation happens, it can come from choice. If something beautiful develops, it can grow instead of being forced. That possibility feels new to them. There is one more detail they have not fully processed, though. Something happened after those tears. A small action. Almost impulsive. They reached for something connected to you. Perhaps an old message. A photograph. A saved conversation. Something that carries the emotional fingerprint of a moment you shared. They looked at it longer than they intended. And what they noticed there made them smile through the remaining tears. It was evidence that the change they are seeing in you did not appear from nowhere. The person you are becoming had been there all along. Hidden inside small decisions. Hidden inside every time you recovered after disappointment. Hidden inside every moment you chose kindness without becoming powerless. Hidden inside every quiet restart nobody applauded. Your soulmate finally connected those dots. And for the first time, they may be understanding the full picture of you rather than only the chapter that involved them. That matters. Because a real connection cannot survive forever when two people only understand the versions of each other that exist inside the relationship. Eventually they must see the whole person, the dreams, the fears, the responsibilities, the private victories, the moments nobody witnessed. Your soulmate is beginning to see more of that person now. And their heart is responding. But there is still something they have not said. Something that formed in their mind during this emotional moment and surprised even them. It was not simply, "I miss you." It was not simply, "I love you." Those feelings may exist, but the sentence went deeper. It carried recognition, accountability, and a quiet hope about the future. They almost said it aloud even though nobody was listening. Then they stopped, because saying those words would mean admitting that the next step can no longer remain imaginary. And that is where this moment leaves us for now, with your soulmate wiping away tears of happiness, staring at something that reminds them of you, realizing that the one thing you finally did was choose yourself without closing your heart, while a sentence they have resisted for far too long waits silently on the edge of becoming real. The sentence almost escaped them in the quiet, and when they caught themselves holding it back, they finally understood why their emotions had become impossible to hide. It was not because they suddenly discovered that they cared about you. That truth had been sitting beneath the surface for much longer than they were ready to admit. What overwhelmed them was the realization that something inside the connection had changed without either of you needing to force it. For so long, they had imagined that if the distance between you ever softened, it would happen through one dramatic conversation, one perfect apology, one unforgettable moment where every misunderstanding disappeared at once. But now they were discovering something far more meaningful. The real turning point had happened quietly inside you. You had begun treating your own heart with the same tenderness you once reserved almost entirely for them. And strangely, that made them feel safer about loving you than anything else ever had. Their eyes returned to that old message, that photograph, that memory, and suddenly the words forming inside them became clearer. "I wish I had understood you sooner." That was the sentence. Not because they had never noticed your kindness. Not because they had been completely unaware of the connection. They wished they had understood the courage hidden underneath your softness. They wished they had realized that every time you gave them space, you were not necessarily pulling away. Sometimes you were protecting something precious from being damaged by pressure. They wished they had understood that your patience was not endless permission for uncertainty. It was a gift. And now that you had finally redirected some of that patience toward yourself, they could see its value with startling clarity. Don't skip, because what happened inside them next is where happiness turned into something even deeper. They started remembering the moments when you had tried to tell them who you really were without using dramatic words. There had been small clues everywhere. The way you could be deeply emotional and still choose restraint. The way you noticed details other people missed. The way you carried disappointments privately because you did not want every difficult feeling to become someone else's burden. They remembered times when you could have reacted impulsively, yet you paused. Times when you could have turned your pain into accusation, yet you searched for understanding. At the time, those moments may not have looked extraordinary. Now your soulmate sees them differently. They see someone who was learning in real time how to love without disappearing inside another person's needs. And what moves them most is that you kept learning even when nobody was praising your progress. That realization has changed how they interpret everything. Suddenly, certain memories no longer look like missed opportunities. They look like preparation. A delayed conversation no longer feels like proof that the connection was impossible. It feels like evidence that both of you needed to grow into a version of yourselves capable of handling something deeper. Even the quiet periods have taken on a different meaning. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that not every pause is an ending. Sometimes a pause is where people discover what they would have drowned out if they had kept speaking. And in their own silence, they discovered that they were not trying to forget you nearly as much as they had been trying to understand what you awakened inside them. That difference matters. There are people we miss because they made life familiar. Then there are people whose presence changes how we see ourselves. Your soulmate is beginning to recognize that you belong to the second kind. Thinking about you has forced them to notice the places where they have been emotionally cautious. The places where they waited for certainty instead of practicing honesty. The places where they assumed love should feel effortless if it was meant to be meaningful. Yet watching your quiet transformation has introduced them to another possibility. Perhaps meaningful love does not remove growth. Perhaps it reveals where growth is required. Something important is waiting for you here. Your soulmate's tears are partly happiness because they can finally imagine approaching you without returning to the old emotional pattern. They do not want to come back into your life simply to recreate uncertainty. They do not want to say beautiful words for one night and leave both of you confused the next morning. A deeper instinct has begun telling them that if they speak now, they need to speak differently. More clearly. More responsibly. More honestly. That is why they have been hesitating even while their heart feels unexpectedly light. They are not searching for the perfect performance. They are searching for the courage to offer something real. And that is a completely different kind of hesitation. Their thoughts wander toward a future they had previously avoided imagining too specifically. Nothing unrealistic. Nothing perfect. They imagine ordinary things. A conversation where neither of you is trying to guess what the other person means. Sitting together without the invisible tension of everything unsaid. Hearing you laugh without wondering whether sadness is hiding behind it. Being able to ask you how you truly feel and staying present long enough to hear the answer. These small images affect them more than grand fantasies ever could. Because suddenly they do not want an idealized version of you. They want the real person. The one who sometimes overthinks, sometimes needs space, sometimes has strong feelings, sometimes gets tired, sometimes becomes hopeful again for reasons nobody else understands. And perhaps this is the most beautiful change of all. They are no longer only attracted to the feeling you create inside them. They are becoming interested in understanding the life you carry when they are not at the center of it. That is maturity entering the story quietly. Stay till the end, because their next realization surprised them. For a long time, your soulmate may have believed that your feelings would remain available no matter how long they waited. Not because they were intentionally taking you for granted, but because emotional familiarity creates strange assumptions. When someone consistently cares, we can unconsciously imagine that care will always remain in exactly the same place, wearing exactly the same expression, waiting for the exact same outcome. But your growth shattered that assumption. They can feel that you are not standing still anymore. You are moving forward, not necessarily away from them, but toward a fuller life. And rather than making them resentful, it made them proud. That was the emotion they did not expect. Pride. They feel proud of someone they may not even have the courage to tell yet. Proud that you chose healing over repetition. Proud that you began investing energy into the parts of your life that had become quiet while your heart was preoccupied. Proud that you are becoming less afraid of uncertainty. Proud that the softness they always admired in you did not disappear when you became stronger. Strength did not turn you cold. It gave your kindness boundaries. And that combination is affecting them deeply. Their mind returned to one particular memory, a moment when you were clearly carrying more emotion than you wanted them to see. Maybe you smiled anyway. Maybe you changed the subject. Maybe you simply said, "I understand," when part of you wanted to ask 100 questions. At the time, they accepted the moment and moved on. Now they wonder what you were carrying behind that calmness. They wonder how many times they misunderstood your silence as ease. They wonder how many private battles you resolved without involving them. This is not creating guilt so much as awareness. And awareness is important because it changes how someone loves. Your soulmate is realizing that caring about you cannot only mean enjoying your warmth when it is available. It also means becoming curious about the parts of your experience that are less convenient to see. That thought softened them again. Their tears returned, but more gently this time. They were smiling now. Because in the middle of all these realizations, one truth felt almost unbelievably simple: you are okay. Not perfect. Not finished growing. Not untouched by everything that happened. But okay in a new way. You are becoming someone who can experience uncertainty without allowing it to define every hour. Someone who can care deeply and still have plans for tomorrow. Someone who can miss a person without turning that absence into a verdict about your worth. And your soulmate finds enormous relief in that. They never wanted their presence or absence to become the measurement of whether your life felt valuable. Maybe they did not know how to communicate that. Maybe they did not even fully understand it themselves. But seeing you step back into your own center has allowed them to breathe differently. Now something else begins happening. When fear decreases, honesty often becomes easier to hear. Your soulmate starts admitting things privately that they once tried to explain away. They admit that some of their distance was not lack of feeling. It was fear of mishandling something meaningful. They admit that they sometimes confused emotional intensity with danger because they did not know how to stay grounded inside it. They admit that seeing how deeply you cared made them question whether they could meet you at the same level. And rather than telling you that, they sometimes became quieter. It felt safer to avoid a conversation than to reveal uncertainty. But time has shown them the cost of that strategy. Silence protects people from immediate discomfort while sometimes creating much larger questions later. They can see that now. And your transformation has made one question impossible to ignore. If I had another chance to speak honestly, what would I say differently? The answer comes quickly this time. They would not begin by trying to define the entire future. They would begin with truth about the present. They would tell you that your impact on them was real. They would tell you that your absence taught them things your presence could not. They would tell you that they noticed your growth even from a distance. They would tell you that they are sorry for the moments when their uncertainty made you question something valuable about yourself. Not because they were responsible for every feeling you experienced, but because they now understand that clarity could have prevented some unnecessary confusion. Most importantly, they would tell you that they do not want you to become your old self again just to make reconnecting easier. They want to meet who you are now. Read that emotionally, not literally. The person crying with happiness is not celebrating because you remained exactly where they left you. They are celebrating because you moved. You evolved. And somehow that movement did not erase the tenderness between you. It refined it. It separated genuine care from emotional dependency. It exposed what was real underneath all the noise. Your soulmate can finally see that connection does not have to demand that either person abandon themselves. It can invite two whole people to become more honest beside each other. That understanding is giving them hope. Then came an unexpected moment. They began laughing softly through the tears. Why? Because they remembered something you once said, perhaps casually, perhaps jokingly, about becoming stronger, changing your life, or refusing to keep repeating the same lessons. Maybe they did not fully believe you at the time.